On today's podcast episode, we had the pleasure of sitting down with Nancy Frates and John Frates, the parents of Pete Frates. If you don't know who Pete Frates is, I suggest you do a little bit of Googling and a little bit of research, but if you did the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, the viral sensation about 10 years ago, he started it. So this episode is I'm very passionate about just because of my relationship with the Frates family and the mission to strike out ALS, a horrendous disease. But this episode, I tend to jump around a little bit. Pat chimes in as well. But there's so much to talk about, from everything that they experienced personally, what this disease does to people, Pete's legacy, and then about the foundation, the Peter Frates Family Foundation, and everything that they're doing today to help with financial assistance for those suffering with ALS. Check out the episode, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, we are back on the Always Bullish Podcast. It's been a little bit since we've had the chance to sit down with a guest, but today we have the one, the only, Nancy Frates and John Frates, parents of Peter Frates. If you don't know Peter Frates, you're probably living under a rock. But Pete Frates was the former Boston College baseball player, key advocate in the ALS community since being diagnosed. And if you were cool or on social media at all about 10 years ago, you were probably part of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which raised over $220 million for ALS research. So we have the pleasure of having Nancy and John with us today. Thanks for coming on the podcast, guys.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Nancy has had, you've had millions of views on your TED Talks and other content. You've spoken at so many different events, which has been a pleasure to just watch. And I always get super emotional watching your stuff. But it's been just about 10 years since the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. Like, can you guys believe that it's been almost 10 years since that viral phenomenon?
You know, not only 10 years, but it's been 5 years since Pete passed. So, I kept saying these are momentary blips in time. Well, how, self-forwarding aware is that? Because they really are a snap of the fingers, and here we are now. And it's going to be 20 years soon.
Right.
Yeah, and I think when you think about the Ice Bucket Challenge being 10 years ago, how I kind of put it in context with a lot of people I've been in a lot of conversations, since 2024 dawned on us. So if you think back to those kids who are maybe 7 or 8 years old, who dumped ice water over their heads with their parents or their neighbors or their family, they're now 17, 18 years old. They're kids in college now. So we have a duty to bring the awareness back this year so that we can educate that whole generation now that is a decade older, so those who were 17 in college at the time are now in their first or second career move. So we need to make sure that we bring this back up, because they will fondly remember pouring ice water over their heads.
Right.
And now you're telling them this is why you did it.
There's so many milestones, I think, in Peter's journey, and just we've had the pleasure of working on his website, right, pfrates.com, which we'll pump that plenty on this podcast, but go and donate, obviously. But one thing we worked on that page was like a milestone page, and there was just so many milestones. So like whether it was, his big day at Boston College hitting like Grand Slam and the highlight reels and all that stuff. There's so many YouTube clips and these little things, and then there's like the book that came out. So there's so many of those that it's hard to keep track of them, and time's flying. So it's hard to believe that it has been 5 years since he passed.
Yeah, and, all those moments that you mentioned, Matt, they happen in a blink of an eye, and there's such incredible highlights. There was such a high space, but then we'd come back and see that he was incapacitated. This incredible viral athlete would be housebound. He was kept by the grace of God by that machine that kept him alive. So we were craving kind of the middle space that we all kind of live in, with momentary highs and lows, but we were always in the ultimate high and the ultimate low, and we never had that middle space.
Yeah, I think when we talk about our journey, and I've had to reflect on this a lot, we go back to March 13th, 2012, when we walked into a doctor's office, and Pete was a vibrant 27-year-old, and he had, everybody knows the story. He got hit in the wrist with a baseball, had gone to the doctors for like 4 months, and then said, hey, can you guys come to this appointment? They know what's wrong with my wrist. And we walked out of there with, he has ALS, and he has 3 to 5 years to live. And, talk about the cliches of your life changes in a moment. That's exactly what we experienced 12 years ago. And people, sometimes forget that Pete was on that journey for 2.5 years before August of 2014. So when August 2014 hit, people say, well, what do you remember the most about it? And I say, what I remember the most about probably that 6-week period, which was, beyond anybody. I mean, I don't even think we have ever really completely grasped what went on each and every day for almost 24/7, especially when it went international. But I said, what I remember the most about that is waking up every morning and it was go time. It literally was go time from the second we woke up in the morning until the second we went to bed, because that's what Pete wanted to do, was raise the awareness. And we knew when it started to go viral that this was the moment that he saw. This was the vision that he saw. So he never had time to actually say, oh, I just got off the phone, with CBS Mornings, or John talked to Japanese television. I did the BBC twice. I mean, I remember we took Pete, I think you'll remember this, John, and through this, right?
Yeah.
Pete is progressing in ALS, and he wasn't verbal any longer in 2014. He was in a wheelchair. We still had to take him back into the clinic, and I remember we had an appointment right in the middle of August, which was at its complete crazy height. And we went in to the doctor's office. It was like a 3-hour appointment. We got back in the car, and of course we checked our phones, and there were 2 voicemails. One was from the LA Times, and one was from the New York Times, from reporters wanting to do an interview with us. So I remember we're driving on Torro Drive, we're sitting in traffic, and I said, hey, do you want to just call the LA Times right now and do this interview? Sure, let's do it now. I mean, it was that kind of attitude. It wasn't, now we laugh at it. We think back to that and we laugh at it. So it was just, I just say we were in the present for every moment, but we were very purposeful and productive because we knew what it meant.
But that mindset was the Pete that I met in 2002. So like that mindset, no surprise there. So it was 2002, when I first met Pete Frates, and we went to St. John's Prep football skills camp, end of August, prepping for the season. I meet Andrew Frates, your other son, and we become pretty tight. But then big man on campus, Peter, totally takes me under his wing, and I just remember him. He comes up to me, and I'm like wearing a backpack, and I think the cool thing in 8th grade was to put like whiteout on your backpack of like the bands you like and things like that. Like I thought it was cool. So I put, I had a bunch of bands on the straps of my backpack, and of course, Pete, being a big music guy, was like, "Hey, so you like the Ataris?" And it's just like this emo punk rock band or whatever. And I was like, "Oh my God, you know the Ataris?" I thought I was like the only one. And like him and I just started talking about music, and then one thing after the next, it was just like doing drills and doing this, and totally took me under his wing, which he did with all of Andrew's friends. And that was that kind of like, I pivoted my life at that moment with those guys and learning from his class of like, there's a whole nother level of expectations and what it's like to be a leader. And so when I hear these things of just like, go time, no matter what is going on, he's been given a death sentence and he's like, it's go time. That's just like, that hits home with me, because like he really changed my life with that stuff.
And that's how he lived his life. I mean, anybody who knew Pete, even when he was little, the kindergarten teacher, you go in to see the kindergarten teacher, and the kindergarten teacher like looks at you and you're like, oh God, what did he do? And she's just like, this kid like literally runs the classroom. I mean, I'm here to steer the ship, but he's the one that every kid is looking at and saying, what are we doing now? But the tagline, Matt, and I love that story that you just gave, because the tagline to all of that is they always said he was inclusive. you know, because that was something that was really important to me, right? I mean, I was a nerd in high school. Let me tell you, people, the popular kids had no idea who I was. I was, you know, it's funny, I'm, you know, a lot of years out of high school, and they still have that perception of me. And it's so funny because I was always very, you know, sensitive to, if you're, you know, a leader, how do you lead? And always was told that he was kind and inclusive. Like everybody played kickball. Like nobody was sitting on the sidelines. And I term this as a blessing of the journey of ALS, which I think is kind of sounds very off, you know, at opposite ends. How can ALS be a blessing? But I choose to learn to take these blessings from our journey. And one of the blessings that I really hold dear is that we've had a number of people tell stories, just like you told a story. And, you know, if Pete wasn't this, you know, got this disease and we didn't lose him, I don't think I would have heard a lot of these stories. I think a lot of people come up to us and tell us Pete's stories that we would never know if everybody just kind of jogged along in their life, right? Yeah. It would have gone on. So thank you for sharing that story, because it really is a blessing to us.
Yeah. Well, he was with a lot of guys in that class that, you know, Steve Van Notes of the world and John Goff and Nip Wassetti, like all those guys, huge, talented guys. And then there was Pete, who was just different. And the way he led was very unique. But he was, I think he won the Unsung Heroine Award, right, that year. He got something.
Oh, yeah, the Athletic Directors Award.
Yeah.
Like you had got.
Yeah.
Right.
Matt, you're no slouch
Yeah,
either.
I was just about to say, Matt, he taught you
Come
well,
on,
hon, because I think you won the same awards he won
Yeah.
went three years later.
Yeah, well,
You just didn't play hockey.
It's true. It's true. I did that after college, and it was a mess. So
I think that we've had an interesting perspective within Torro working on all of this stuff, because you couldn't get closer than Matt, right? In high school with Pete. For me, I was introduced through the Ice Bucket Challenge, and it's been an honor to work on this and to learn more about Pete and your family and meet Andrew and be a part of this has been amazing. But I come at it from that perspective, so I had to learn about Pete. And being a sports, you know, guy myself, I think one of the most underrated things when I think back to my sports career and the teammates that I had is no one ever forgets the older guys that were nice to them. It's such a simple thing, but like I think back to teammates, the ones that when you were a freshman that did something really small to make you feel good and a part of the team, and not like the freshman that has to carry the buckets, which you should as a freshman carry the buckets.
Right.
But there's something to that, so it's been pretty cool to learn this story and have a different perspective, having to learn about it and trying to get that across through the social media and through the website has been really cool. But even hearing that story, everything that I see, it just seems like Pete was the perfect person to take this on.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And you know what, being his parents, we're not the ones that chose him for that. Not to get too religious or, you know, but it's more spiritually. Pete's whole story from birth until the ALS diagnosis, Pete was prepped for it. And if you have any type of sense that this, you know, what we see right here tangibly is not the end-all, be-all of everything, there is, whatever it is, energy, for me it's God, for someone else it might be something else, there's something else going on. I don't know, Matt, if even you know this story, but Pete was, he was born he was almost 9 pounds, very healthy boy. But unfortunately, there was staph infection in the nursery. I don't know if you know this story. There was staph infection in the nursery, and Pete got staph in his blood system. And that is 80% fatal in newborns. But we had an amazing pediatrician. Pete lost a pound of weight overnight after he was born. There was all these complications. Within 24 hours of his birth, they came in, they said, this is not good. They said, this is not good, and we're going to put you in pediatrics. And Pete and I, John went home because we had Jen. John went home, took care of Jen. Pete and I went to pediatrics. And for the next 12 days, I watched Pete fight to stay alive as a newborn. And now I look at all those milestones in his life, and I believe that that was the beginning of Pete's story, was when God said, I got other plans for you. And how I know that is because Pete told me after his diagnosis. He told our family what we were going to do, but then looked at us and basically said, but you're going to do a lot of work, but I need you to know that, I was chosen for this, but it's probably not going to be in time for me. So, it's a complete story where a lot of people look at our story starting in 2012, but there's a whole story of Pete to become who he was, to do what he did.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But he's always been a fighter
Always.
since day one.
And to clarify, when I say the perfect person, I think it took a strong person like Pete to create this phenomenon that has been, created.
When
Yeah.
you were talking about leadership earlier, it's easy for any of us to be just a dick, right? To be an asshole. It comes naturally that way. But in order to be kind, you have to work at it. To be nice, you have to work at it. And then it becomes integrated into your system or whatever, the way you present yourself. But for Pete, that's the way he was. There wasn't any hint of being a dick. And you can either grow out of it or morph out of it, but he was just a wonderful, wonderful, kind, great guy.
Yeah. No, there's just
We
that.
miss him so much.
I know, right? We just look back at so many clips all the time.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much stuff that
Yeah.
even now,
Thank God there is.
working with, right? I know. If someone was hitting record back then, it was great. But, I mean, even just the photos and stuff. Like, I remember Andrew coming in here to this office right after Pete's passing with hard drives and photo albums and everything. He brought it all in here. We sat next to each other for a very long time, capturing all of them and digitizing all of them and organizing them. And it was a lot of work, but it was a view at Pete's life that, like, I feel very blessed to have the opportunity to work on something like that.
He was, it's funny because he does come across in pictures. You got to remember, Pete was brought up with us without us having iPhones. So, we don't have 10,000 pictures of him at 3 years old. We have whatever camera we had available that we actually took pictures of him. And you do look at a lot of those pictures, and it's funny, as you said, I go out and I do a lot of public speaking, and I got asked from this company to speak in San Antonio, Texas. I think it was back in 2017, and I always do a pre-call. So they book me through my agent, and then after everything is dotted and crossed, I jump on a call with whoever hired me from the company, and then, upper management or whoever, to get the theme of, why did you hire me? Who's sitting in the audience? What's the theme of your conference or your summit or whatever you're doing, and how I can best fit our story so that there's value for you, because you're paying me to come in. So I want to make sure that you're getting your value. And I remember this one company called, and I said, what's your theme? And he said, it, being it. And I said, it's really funny that that's your theme, because I had teacher, coaches, mentors. We always had people say to us, he has it.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable, because I walked into the conference center where they had it, and they had these big, huge, signs and banners that all said it. And I think that kind of sums who he was. He just had it.
He did have it. That's the miscellaneous, can't put a name on it, but I'm just like, I have other stuff up here, and I'm like looking at stuff like that, like them just in front of the driveway. He's got some nice overalls, and it's just like photos like that.
He
and
loved the
things.
suspenders.
Those suspenders are incredible.
He had them in all colors.
But there's a lot of those things that we got access to, and then the world just, I think, fell in love with Pete. So anytime that we were able to drop one of those kind of like insider either clips or insider photos. People are just like, that is so sweet. People lose it over.
Nice.
You know, it's funny.
Pete,
So we're, you know, we always talk about Pete in such glorious ways, and honestly, that's who he was. But, you know, Pete was also a very straight shooter.
Yeah.
You know, if he didn't like something, I mean, he'd jump all over me all the time. I mean, I would say something,
You're an
and
easy
he would.
target.
So I have a problem sometimes pronouncing people's names. Look at my maiden name is Delfonso, and so I lived this life where people couldn't pronounce my last name, and I think it's just been, you know, an Achilles heel for me that if I see somebody complicated last name, you know, Sullivan, I can
You can get that one.
I can throw these ones out, but some of the others, well, I would say someone's name wrong, and I would not live that down for months. But that was another thing about him, is he was very much a straight shooter. I love the story that's in the front of our book that Casey Sherman writes about in about our book. So what happened was, this all happened about a year later. Someone said, you know, we're going to try to get your book written, and Casey Sherman, who wrote The Perfect Storm, very prolific author, New York Times bestselling author, and Dave Wedge, they set up an appointment for them to come out to the house. And now Pete is now on a ventilator at this point, and he's typing with his eyes on his eye gaze. So Casey and Dave come into the house, and we've got Jen and Andrew and Julie and Pete and John and I sitting in this room, and Casey and Dave. Now, Casey and Dave get people wanting them to write their books all the time. So their attitude walking in is that they are going to vet us to see if this is a story they want to take on.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, and we're all prepared for it, right? So he comes walking in, and we're all talking and talking and talking. And then at one point, Casey's phone, he gets a text message, and he pulls out his phone, and it's Pete. What did he write? Something like, "This is all bullshit," or something like they are just spewing bullshit, or something like that. And he just, you know, he's just like, okay, let's bring this back to reality here. And
I think he's doing it now to you.
Oh my God, classic Pete. He was always a straight shooter. He's not going to dance around anything.
No.
He's so direct, which was like part of the coaching element of him, was just
Exactly.
being direct, not dancing around it, no BS. So funny. I think there's a million stories about Pete, and I think one of the greatest ones was John in the church that day. You were talking about the snow plowing and the snow removal, and all that was just like so simple, but it just like spoke volumes of like he just kept going to help more people.
You know, I don't know how I came up with the phrase that I used, which was, his currency was in helping others. And that was, you know, I keep coming back to that theme because that was his essence. He helped coach and mentor younger guys. He wanted to be a role model for people in the schools or on the field, but he also wanted to help others who couldn't help themselves. And when he had the opportunity with the truck or with his skills that he and I would work on houses together, landscape, whatever it might be, that's what he would do, and he would help other folks. You know, I'm thinking to myself, well, this is my valuable time. I'm using it for myself, maybe some inner circle of family, but I'm certainly not going to just stop randomly and shovel some person's driveway because he sees them having a difficult time. But that was Pete. He didn't care. He loved just helping and see you later, thanks a lot.
It's transitioned, I think, into the foundation because I think like when the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge happened, a lot of people are donating, and that's donating to like finding a cure, which is overall the mission.
Right.
But you guys have taken a very different stance of the care side. So I think that's something that I've talked about with like Mike Pitt, who's now director of the foundation, was like cure versus care, and Peach's love and helping people. So there's these different associations doing the cure research, but you guys have focused on helping people that need help, right?
Yeah, because the cure, as we like, you know, as it's kind of termed, the cure is for those soon to be diagnosed, right? The research is going to, We don't have it yet. We're not there yet. So, through the drug discovery, clinical trial, bring to market process that unfortunately in the United States takes years. And we were very specific when we knew we were going to continue Pete's mission, where we wanted to put our name, our family's name. And it was based and organically came from our own experience. A ventilated patient, so going back to the diagnosis, they give you this diagnosis, you're spinning, your head's out of control. They say, come back in a couple of weeks, just so that we can sit down after you get to process this. And then in that second meeting, you're talking more rationally about the reality of what you're about, because you're going to the end game. When they first give you the diagnosis, everybody goes right to the end game, because they tell you it's 100% fatal. So you're looking at your loved one, and you're already trying to figure out how you're going to live without them. That's where your head is. You can't get further than that. And so you go back, 2 or 3 weeks later for that next appointment, and then you start talking about, this is what's going to happen, the day-to-day, and then they look at you, and they say, based on decisions that you all make, or the patient makes during this journey, there's going to be times where you're going to have to employ home health care. And we're here to tell you that it's not covered by insurance. So you buckle up and you figure out, okay, well, we're gonna figure this out. And then they look at you and they say, as this progresses, it will get to about $250,000 a year to take care of your ALS patient. They actually tell you that. And you look at them and you say, okay, well, this person is still walking and talking and physically able, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And that bridge comes awfully fast. And so our foundation, it's very important that people who are on this journey know that at least we can help out in some, and we try to keep it significant. We don't give out small grants. We give out a significant amount based on what their need is. And we're happy to say that we're running right now. We're doing about 60 families a year, which is great. But as you mentioned, we've just brought Mike Pitt on as our executive director to scale this so we can help more patients. And it's very timely to do that because we're about to go to Dallas in a couple of weeks to a national ALS summit. And what is going to be talked about at this summit is that, yes, we want the cure, but right now we're trying to make ALS a livable disease, a chronic disease, say in an MS, or all these, like AIDS. AIDS has always been the one that we kind of look to because it's a cocktail that keeps, AIDS is not cured. AIDS is livable now. You live with HIV. And so that's what we're trying to do with ALS. But we know if we do that, the patient's still going to progress. It's not going to stop the progression. It's just going to slow it down. And if it slows it down, what's going to happen is that 3 to 5 years might be changed to 5 to 10 years. In our hopes, it goes from 10 to 20 years, right? But they're still going to progress. So so either we get the government to wake up and say, you got to help pay to keep these people in their homes, the need is just going to exponentially grow. So,
but there's a couple things too. With the Ice Bucket Challenge money, it predominantly went towards research. Right. So we feel that if you drop $225 million or whatever it was in 6 weeks' time, and the majority goes to research, we've done an awful lot of that initial thrust of money on research. And when it was so difficult for us to maneuver inside our 4 walls because we wanted a young guy like Pete who started a family to be able to live comfortably in our space, and only because of the generosity and the largesse and the concern of so many others, we were able to do that. So that is our priority right now with our foundation. Let's help those people who are in the exact same situation we were, where there's no end in sight. They can't figure it out. Well, let us help a little bit.
Every single August, there's the charitable event at Turner Hill, and Nancy, you always pick up the mic and give that recap, and I always look forward to it because you say, like, here's what we did in the past year. And some of those moments we've gotten up there, you've held a letter, and you've read personal experiences and thank yous from some of these people. Like, I mean, there's a video on the website from James Klingman, which is lovely to get his words while he's battling ALS, to get his thank you to you. And I mean, there's some other ones here, like I think more recently you may have met with, I think Sandy and David locally in, I think it's Andover, something like that, who they're in their 30s, and he was just diagnosed and they just had a new baby. And there's these conversations that you're having with these people, and you guys are getting tons of letters, thank yous, love, because your generosity and the foundation to go and continue to help support these people in their need. I mean, what's that like, getting some of these letters from people?
It's just our honor, Matt. It's our honor that we're doing this. We get a lot of people that say to us, Pete's been gone 5 years. So let's get real. ALS is a very difficult journey. And you were right by our side. You saw what would go on in our house every day. And so I think what plagued ALS for a lot of years was that it is such a difficult journey that by the time you lose your loved one, you're just spent, and you're just, we just can't go on with this. And you kind of go on with you're just trying to get your life back on track. And you kind of want to leave ALS in the dust and leave it behind you. And honestly, we would do that. We would have done that. But we promised Pete. And what John just said is probably what catapults us the most, is that because Pete was higher profile, we had a lot of people that came and helped us keep him in the home where he should be and where he's loved. And if we, and that is now our purpose. That is why we get up. If we can help mentor patients, help them, be a little bit more aware. John calls it the breadcrumbs. John always said that nobody, when we got home that day from that diagnosis, there was no breadcrumbs. We had nowhere to go. We didn't know what to do, where to go, who to turn to, who to ask for help. We always said, who's raising money? Where's the research being done? We didn't even know any of that. Here we are 12 years later. Yes, that whole dynamic has changed, but now we got to do something about it. So this is the piece of this journey that we have attached ourselves to, that we want to do something about.
And Pete made us promise.
Yeah,
So
and that was the bottom line. He made us
he
promise.
would kick our ass if we didn't do something about it, so we're still doing something about it. Would we rather not probably go golfing, especially at our age, but we still have to do this mission because it's not complete. That's the driving force.
But to receive those letters,
Yeah,
do you have time for a quick story? Because I'm going to.
Please.
Well,
Okay.
if I could just talk about an ultimate warrior too, Steve Gleason out of New Orleans. Pete went down to see Steve. He was looking for a young man who might have had some answers, and Steve fit that bill. So he flew down there. I think Pearl Jam was playing. So Pete
loves that.
Pete was on stage with Steve. He loved that man. But the ESPYs just announced that Steve Gleason is going to get the Profile and Courage Award, or their version of that.
Wow.
So that's going to be pretty cool to see and witness, because that guy
He's
is
amazing.
another warrior for ALS.
Yeah,
totally.
amazing. So I got an application in February, and I vet through ALS organizations. So it was all a vetted ALS patient, and sent off the grant. And so at the end of January, I sent the grant off. Well, middle of February, late February, I got a phone call, and it was from, something foreign. I had never heard of, like, this AT&T, a very technical name. I hadn't answered the phone because, of course, it came up as potential spam. So I went in my voicemail, and it said that it was an AT&T operator calling me. And I'm like, at first, we live in, it's so sad because
cynical.
It's very cynical. We live in a very cynical with our phones, right? So she must have called 3 times before I, gave any validity to it. And she called again. So I picked up the phone, and she explained who she was. She said, someone is trying to call you that is disabled, and they need to use this special service that I didn't even know AT&T had.
Some sort of
that
ability assist.
It's an ability assist or something. And she said, I'd like to connect you with them. They're on the phone right now. So what's going to happen, she's being very specific with me. He types with his eyes. So as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my God, it's an ALS patient calling me. So she's explaining, she's reading off her thing. He types with his eyes. He's disabled, blah, blah, blah. He'd like to speak to you, but it's going to be me talking with you. So he's going to type, I'm going to read it, and then you're going to tell me, and I'm going to type back to him. So I'm like, wow. So right away, he introduces himself, and I identify that he's one of our grant recipients from January. He says, why did you send me money? So I explained the application, right? And I said, and there was a lovely application. Then he said, who wrote the application? And I said, well, it says you did. I said, I'm not sure. Maybe it was someone at one of these organizations that I deal with. And he said, do I get to keep this money? And I said, you get to keep this money. Well, what should I use it for? And I said, you should use it to make your quality of life better. I said, and if he says, well, I do have someone who comes in, can I hire more hours? So we had this whole conversation. And at the end of the conversation, just the gratitude, he just couldn't believe it. It was like he couldn't believe it. And here is this girl sitting in God knows where who's translating this call. And so it's her voice telling me his words, right? But you could feel the emotions coming through and just his gratitude. And it was unbelievable. I was like, I wish I could get a recording of this, because it was the most amazing thing. And so at the end of the conversation, she said, okay, he's hanging up now. And she says, Mrs. Frates, can you stay on the phone for a second? And I said, yes. And so he hung up, and she said to me, she said, this has been one of the most honorable things I've ever done. And she just decided to talk about the conversation that she was just a part of. And I remember hanging up the phone, and it was one of the most extraordinary things. We were in Florida, actually, when that happened. And it was one of the most unbelievable things. So you talk about getting letters, which we just got a bunch of them last week. And yes. And you know why I know how important those are to us? Is because I was one of those people who wrote those. I was a person who was a recipient of people who had given us aid and help in keeping Pete in our home. So when you ask us how we feel about it, it just fuels us to do it more.
I can imagine that person talking with their eyes, being like, why did you do this? I can imagine, like, when Pete just would go help people, that they would have that same thought. Why are you helping us? Like, why are you doing that? And he would just do it. And that's what the foundation's doing. That's what you guys are doing. You're just doing it, which is Pete's way of, just
Thanks,
carrying
Matt.
on that. I
Thanks for
see
that.
that. It's really,
Thank you for that.
I can
Great way
connect
to
those.
tie it up. Yeah.
I can connect those dots all day there. And
Wow,
Mike,
good one.
Mike Pitt, your executive director, just sent me dozens of letters, screenshots that I have here on the screen. I can't even read through all of them. There's like way too many here. But it's just that gratitude. It's just people that are just so appreciative
Well,
of
we
you guys.
didn't know how to promote what we were doing either, and did we want to? We wanted to do it very quietly. We wanted to build something, but we also didn't want to feel inundated as well. But now what Mike is doing, it by taking it to this next level, it's just going to be more events, more, hopefully generating more income, therefore more output and helping more people, because just like football, and it's blocking and tackling. Well, we need blocking and tackling to get the end result, which is the treatment and the cure.
Yeah.
So how's that for tying something up in your world?
I love it.
All right.
I think it's very, it's kind of unfair to put all that on you too in general. So to have someone like Mike step in and help is.
But even what
it's-
you're doing for us, Matt,
I know, Matt.
we're just so, we might as well be sending a carrier pigeon message. We have no idea what the F is going on.
No,
And
for what
Mike
you two, yeah.
and Matt, you guys are like godsends, because we just did something with Boston Man magazine last week, and I could not believe the amount of content producers. I'm saying to myself, is this media people? What is happening here?
Yeah.
And it was all, no, they're filming for content for their own podcast. These people are influencers. And I'm like, oh, okay.
We're in all these meetings. Mike and you have us doing so much, and you know what? It is so eye-opening to us that, I mean, we're old. We're on Medicare. Let's get real. That's how old we are. Okay, and we to try to keep up at the pace of how fast things are going right now. It's so funny, you put us on this program that you all use here so efficiently, and I cannot do it. I said to Mike, must have been a half an hour after we worked out what was going to happen, which took us like 20 seconds. But I remember saying to him, and Mike, can you kind of take over that whole program with Torro? Because I just can't wrap my brain around it. And it's the efficiencies that you all have, that you take advantage of, is so beyond what we can do. So how I interpret those efficiencies is that we're going to be able to help more people,
Definitely.
right? So that's the bottom line for us. So
Well, he's just
thank you.
sending stuff our way. Like, he sent us the original like V1 of that magazine cover, for instance. And I was like, let us run a comb through this real quick.
Yeah,
They're like, let's
yeah,
put a
yeah.
little spin on it. So like anything he's sending us, we're trying to
cool.
put like a little more touch, like really just showcase Pete in the best way possible.
Thank you.
Thanks.
But that was cool to see that event.
But all this fast-paced technology is also going to lead to the ultimate cure.
Exactly.
So that's the good news there.
And that brings us back to what we talked about. You guys are attracting the younger audience. So the younger audience is now hearing this story. Look, we can do traditional media any day of the week. We actually can do Facebook pretty good.
Yeah.
But Facebook is now reaching our peer group, right? So you're helping us reach the younger peer group who are being brought up in a world now that talks about ALS, right? So someone told me a month ago, there's a storyline on General Hospital now. One of the characters has ALS, but they're not just, he's not in a bed, he's actually functioning. But so they're showing this progression in somewhat real time, and how he's handling different hurdles, right? Back in, when we were growing up, ALS, it wasn't even in the consciousness of anyone. It was Lou Gehrig.
Right.
You talked about Lou Gehrig, but nobody knew what Lou Gehrig had. I mean, last everybody saw Lou Gehrig, he was, talking, doing his luckiest man speech at Yankee Stadium, and he walked off.
Right.
He spoke and he walked off. The two major things that happen, and so that's why this is so valuable to do things that we never even conceived of, something calling a podcast, and now here we are doing podcasts. So it's great.
Love it. I think maybe a couple of things to put a little bow on this, but what's the best way someone can get, involved with the foundation? Like, listening to this, seeing some clips, like, what are some of the easiest ways that they could maybe, get involved?
So I would say PeteFrates.com. Go there, all the information that you are such a great curator of, and take good care of us, keeping it alive. I think one thing that we would say that we like doing, and we have a lot of success with, are our events.
Yeah.
So just come to an event. If you come to an event, you're supporting the foundation, you're supporting ALS families, because our foundation runs these events. And I can probably guarantee, and you guys have been at our events, that you're probably going to have a good time, because, look, that's one thing Pete wanted. ALS is not fun. It's not fun to talk about. It's not fun to look at. It's just not fun. But we always knew that, Pete being the leader, that we wanted these events to bring joy to people, because people are living in the moment, right? So you're all there right then, right? So bring joy. But most of all is to talk about hope. And so we try to fill them with hope. So that's the easy, low-hanging fruit. Come to an event and have fun, because, of course, we're going to dive into Gloucester waters again this year.
Can't wait.
So
I
we're
saw
here
that.
to officially announce that on December 28th, which would be Pete's 40th birthday this year. Go to PeteFrates.com and sign up and come plunge in the water with us. And with Mike involved now, it's going to be even bigger and better. And I would say the second thing is if you love hockey players and you like to have casual conversations with them and take lots of pictures with them, the Boston Bruins, through the Ray Bork Foundation that we team up with to do the Captain's Gala, which will be September 19th this year at SOA in the
New
South
location.
End, new location for the third annual one. We would say, come on down to Boston and get all dressed up and have a lot of fun. And we had almost 700 people at it last year, and we're expecting to have that at a minimum this year. And there's going to be a lot more. Every year you build on it, right? So it's our third year. We're building on it again. And what's nice about the gala is that 50% of the money from the gala, we're happy to say that we are keeping our support of the research side in addition to what we're doing, because 50% of the gala funds goes directly to the Healy Center for ALS at Mass General Hospital, which not only was that where Pete was treated and where his doctor is, but it's pretty much the epicenter for ALS advancements. So then we have a golf tournament. So that's how I would do it. If you just want to write a check, you can do that also. I don't think anybody writes checks anymore, but you can go online and donate through PeteFrates.com. So,
Awesome.
and drop us a line. If you know of a ALS family in need that are struggling with some health care, there's a contact us on there too.
Perfect. There's sorry, go for it.
Yeah, no, I just had one more thing that personally I wanted to hear you speak on. I think a big thing in looking at it from the marketing side, and I think this is in a very important time right now with the 10-year anniversary of the Ice Bucket Challenge. The reason I say that is because, as I said, that's how I was introduced to it, and that's how I know from speaking to people, that's how most people were introduced to this, because anytime I say, yeah, we work with the Peter Frates Foundation, sometimes it's like, oh, that's familiar. Remember the Ice Bucket Challenge? Everyone. Oh, my God, yes. So I think it's a time to strike right now. So that's my mindset from the marketing side, right? What I'm interested in, and I work with this all the time, is when you say Pete made you promise, is that I've seen quotes from him, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what that promise was, and really that I'm going to take this on. I feel like that's a little tiny gap that I'd love to get filled on is Pete's mindset of saying, no, I'm going to attack this.
So let me talk first. I'll just tell my part, and then we'll go to you. So first of all, Pete always had an expectation for us. So just take it from bottom level. There was always, this is what I'm doing. Are you in? You're in. And so where it started? It started the night of diagnosis. It started with him setting the vision, saying what his goals were. And he basically looked at us and said, there's no wallowing and there's no whining. Are you with me? I mean, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the trajectory of this disease. Now, if that's not a visionary, right, who sees, you think of a trajectory change, right, a straight line, and then all of a sudden you get a 90-degree angle or a 45-degree angle, whatever. He saw it. Did he know what it was? No. But August 2014 was that trajectory change. So we started the next morning. He had paper and pencil, this is what we're going to do. So the promise was to who he was. That was who he was. So when you have a child, you raise them to be the best person they can be. That's your gift to the world, right? Is this next generation that you have been given the care of to bring out and do good in the world. So our promise to him was, we're going to keep it going for you. So I
Well,
think
Matt
that's when it
knows
starts.
more than most because he was in the locker room with Pete. Pete's a locker room guy. He didn't like having clothes on until, at the appropriate times. But he talked in locker room jargon. So what he would say at that meeting, the first night of diagnosis, is we're going to strap it on, we're going to put on our work boots, and we're going to get after it. And I knew exactly what he meant. He's talking in all just locker room terms, but it's, we're going to do this together. We're going to go big or go home. He'd say all this stuff. And you're like, okay, this is just bullshit, phraseology, but it's not. He really, really meant everything, and he laid down a challenge to us. So that's why we're still doing this. Look, the doctor told him that night, that first diagnosis date, when he asked her, how much is it going to take to cure this thing? She said, Pete, I need $1 billion. I'm going to get that for you, he says. I'm looking at him going, what are you talking about? We're a middle-class family. We can't even spell billion. Well, they're announcing this year at that thing in Dallas that they have taken all that ice bucket money, parlayed it through, if we will donate, if you kick
Leverage
back
it.
or leverage it for millions, that the whole thing has worked out to $1 billion. So that part of it is his promise was fulfilled. I made a promise when Matt was talking about the eulogy initially at the beginning. I made a promise that before I take the big dirt nap, that we'd have at least a treatment, and we're not there yet. So I guess I'm extended on this earth for a little bit more time, and that's why we're doing this too, is to make sure that no other family is in this position that we're at right now.
It's amazing.
Pat, honestly, for me personally, and John and Pete, had their own language. I kind of, I think you have a different relationship with your mom and your dad. I couldn't get off the floor. After the diagnosis, I literally was in my house on the floor. And his words that night, when I was in a trance. They had to get me medication to get me to even just come to. And I was sitting there, and I looked at him, and he was right here to my left, where he sat every night at our kitchen table. And I listened to him, and I thought to myself at one point, for as bad as I'm feeling about this, it's my child. I didn't get an ALS diagnosis. The doctor didn't look at me and said, you have 3 to 5 years to live. He told him that. And he talks like this, and he says these things, and he didn't say them. He wasn't just giving us lip service. Pete never gave lip service. Never. If he said something, he meant it 150%. With his conviction and with his knowledge of why he was in this position, that was it. That was it. I was done. I used to have girlfriends that tell us, my girlfriends would be crying sitting with me, and I wouldn't be shedding a tear. And they would say to me all the time, why aren't you crying? I can't. I can't cry. Number one, I can't cry because if I start, I won't stop. But more importantly, Pete asked me not to. Pete told me to get to work. And that was how we lived through this.
I have
It's perfect.
a tradition every August when I go to the golf tournament. That morning, it's about a 15, 20-minute drive for me. But every single time I get in the car to go to the charity event, I dig up the oldest archived clips I can find of Pete to hear his voice. Mm-hmm. And there's so many you can find like later on, but it's a drive that I have that is just turned into a tradition, so I can hear him talk and things like that. So I always look forward to that, and what's been happening with the foundation every single year and the movement with it. But we're all on board for the mission. Everyone under this roof here is part of that mission and finding that. But I got 2 boys at home, and I hope someday they can be just like Pete.
Thank you for sharing that too, because I think I don't want people just to remember the Ice Bucket Challenge.
Yeah.
Because it was a fun viral sensation. So that everything you just said is what I and we want to bring to the forefront.
Right.
To kind of re-emphasize, hey, this was the man.
He
He had it.
He
you
was
know,
the
and I
man.
think that was the one big thing I had. I didn't mean to take us backwards because we were talking about the foundation, but that was one thing I really wanted to hear your.
Well, so over the past 10 years, look, the number one question is how did it happen? How did August of 2014 happen? And we give a very simple answer. It was a life well lived. A life well lived. Pete's life. Look, it was his connection with Matt Sullivan. It was his connection with his teammates, with his classmates, to all those parents that told us those stories. It was those connections. It was the circles of Pete, right? It was the life he led prior to the diagnosis, which made the Ice Bucket Challenge happen. Because he went out, all those people that he affected, he went out and asked them to join him. That was his favor back that he wanted from them, and they did.
We're going to reignite everything now on the 10-year anniversary of this thing. So looking forward to sharing everything from today. And thank you guys for coming on. I know it's hard to talk about, obviously.
You guys are the best.
So, yeah, you guys are.
I'm sorry I didn't know him back then, and I didn't go to St. John's Prep with the boys because I've met so many of them, and I'm like, damn, that would have been a great time
It was a
to
good
be
time.
part of that. But I am very
They
happy
were mostly
to.
in my basement, you know.
I was going to say, we've all slept in that basement before. So,
Well, I'm glad to be a small part of it now, you know, with you.
You're Pete adjacent because
Yeah.
Matt is the closest that we have right now to Pete, not only athletically, but spiritually, morally. It's the difficulties that you've gone through and everything that you've done for us. You know, I love that story about listening to Pete's voice because it took me a while to recapture the vitality of Pete after he passed, because we're confronted with the guy who's in a wheelchair, and people were inspired by that. That's great, but I'm most proud to remember when he was a full essence, and you know that, Matt, and you know you can share that after we're long gone. So thank you for allowing us to talk about him today. This is awesome too for us. It's very therapeutic.
of course, we'll never stop singing his praises and sharing his story. So,
And I think about Lucy because here's a kid who may live to be 100 years old, so she has that into the future, whereas, you know, we're up there, as they say. Well, I got to go watch the debate tonight. I think it's Lincoln against George Washington,
oh, God,
two former presidents.
I forgot about that.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Great. But,
Thanks, guys.
yeah, we'll have you guys on anytime you want to talk about next event or anything like that. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.